Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is my first video, so I appreciate you stopping by. Here I am getting this neck cut and ready to glue on the fretboard and get ready for shaping. And to start, we got to route the truss rod channel and cut our headstock angle, which you'll see here in a little bit. This neck is for this body here that I've had made for quite some time. It is a full hollow walnut body with an old growth California redwood top. I was actually given this top. I had taken a relative to go get his truck interior reupholstered, and just happened to start a conversation with the guy and told him what I did. And he said he had this old piece of wood that his dad cut down in the California redwood forest when he was just a teenager, and never ended up doing anything with it. He was a cabinet maker, and this wasn't really great for cabinets. His son ended up getting it and getting into upholstery and didn't use it, and so he very kindly gave it to me to make instruments out of, and I am very grateful for that. And I really love when I've got a cool story behind a piece of wood like that. And also a piece of wood that I will probably never get my hands on again, so I'm very fortunate. There you just saw me mark the height for the thickness of the neck. I leave it intentionally taller than I need, so that way I can make a relief cut on the back, and I will know then that my neck height will match my bridge height perfectly. Okay, this is my headstock angle jig. I do a 7-degree angle on the headstocks, and it cuts off the front face, and then the front face that is then removed is going to get glued onto the back of the headstock to finish out the correct thickness and angle that I need. I mismeasured here and accidentally cut too much material off, so you can see that I cut into the truss rod channel, and that is not exactly ideal. But that piece is going to go to the back and get glued on like this, and then trim down later. I have a plan. So there is my fretboard where it needs to end, and you can see that there is no material supporting it underneath. Thankfully, I had already planned on putting a headstock veneer on this guitar, so I will extend that into the plane that I removed too much of, flatten it, and then once the fretboard is on there, it'll be perfect. The only issue is you could potentially see the mistake from the side, but this is going to be a bound neck and headstock anyways, so that will all disappear. Here I am just prepping the back of the headstock to get glued on and clamped. And I have a little trick for this. I wipe on my glue, and then I put 2 dots of super glue on the back side of the joint, and that allows me to hold the piece in place for a little bit and let the super glue set before putting the clamps on. If you don't do this, because you're clamping on an angle, the viscosity of the glue wants to slide the piece around and not line it up perfectly. So this is a neat little hack. Since this headstock is a relatively small surface, it's hard to get even clamping pressure, and so I always use a clamping caul like this Basically, it's just a template that's slightly smaller than the headstock shape, and I can put my clamps on there and get even glue pressure around the entire joint so I don't have any gaps. Now it's the next day, the glue is dried, so the clamps have come off, and I'm just planing this front face uh, smooth, so that way I can then glue on my headstock layer. It's important that you keep the sanding block flat, and I'd like to sand in just one direction for something like this, so that way I don't accidentally create a hump and create an uneven gluing structure for the headstock layer. I have a little bit more of this redwood that matches the top, and I even had a piece with a little bit of sapwood in it, which is the whiter colored wood, and it will match the top perfectly. Jumping ahead a little bit here, I moved on to inlay onto the fretboard, and I'm trying something kind of radical. We'll either ruin a really great fretboard in inlays, or it'll work perfectly. These eagle inlays have enough detail and sharp edges to them that I did not feel comfortable attempting to route the material out with a Dremel and a small bit and get clean lines. So I decided to assemble them on the fretboard, glue them in place on the surface of the fretboard, and then I am going to use a jeweler's saw and very carefully cut around each individual piece to then drop that flush with the front surface of the fretboard and then plane the back. So, not the traditional way to do it. It's my first time trying it. Like I said, we'll see if it works out or if I wasted some good materials and my time. The hardest part of this entire process was the feet of these birds. I had a heart attack when I thought I had lost one, and the prospect of trying to cut another one that looked anything close to the originals was kind of out of the question. Thankfully, I found it, but yeah, a little bit stressful. I'm going to apologize in advance. This footage is a little bit shaky. I didn't realize that my phone was kind of vibrating on the table as I was doing this. You can see that the situation devolved into cutting the fretboard into mini bite-sized chunks and slowly with the jeweler saw cutting out around each inlay. I got a pretty good result. I'm relatively happy with how it went. In the future, I might try this again a little bit differently, but truth be told, to do super intricate inlays like this, nothing really beats a CNC machine these days. That's what all the big guys use, and I will probably look at doing something similar. Now I know what you're thinking. How am I going to get this fretboard back together and have it play in tune at the end of this whole thing? I wasn't sure myself at first, so what I ended up doing was I used my fret saw, which is the exact kerf of each fret slot, and I went one chunk at a time, put my saw in the slot, and glued each block of fretboard back together to a veneer on the underside to hold everything together. Once everything was back together as one single fretboard, I double checked it across my fretboard slotting template, and everything was perfectly straight and in the right spot, thankfully. Worst case scenario, my backup plan was to basically cut each individual fret block out, sand the edges, glue it all back together, and then reslot the whole thing. So, like I said, this was an experimental process. I won't be doing it again in this exact manner, but this is a guitar that is just for me. It's not for a customer, so I was willing to give something a little bit more experimental a shot, knowing that, like I said in the video previously, if I run a fretboard, just make a new one. As you can see there, my fretboard is now back together. Inlays lowered, the back planed down. It was a process, trust me. Okay, so now we are getting ready to glue everything together. And I'm going to get ahead of myself here because I accidentally hide my truss rod from myself underneath this wax paper. I put this down so that way any glue that maybe drips down doesn't leave a mess on my table. Easy to clean up. On the headstock end of the neck, I made a center line, and then on either end of my fretboard on a piece of tape, I had marked the center line. That way, using the truss rod slot and then the mark that I made on the neck, I know that my fretboard is perfectly straight. And I also do a mark of where the nut of the fretboard is going to end. And I forgot my truss rod. After a few seconds of panic, I will find it in a second and correct my mistake. You may have noticed that white strip on top of my truss rod. I route the channel down a little bit deeper than I need and like to super glue to the top of the truss rod a piece of binding. It is hard enough that when you are using the truss rod to adjust the neck, it's not super soft or anything. It doesn't cave in, so it doesn't prevent the truss rod from doing its job. But what it does do is dampen any vibrations of metal against the underside of the fretboard as the instrument vibrates. In the past, when gluing on fretboards, I have used pins underneath that will lock its position, and that is a great way to do it. It's an extra step, and truth be told, I don't find it to be that advantageous. I put one clamp on the end, on the nut side where I want it. I set up my call, and then put a clamp on the bottom next to the truss rod, and go from there. And as long as my center lines are good, I've never had any issue of a fretboard it's moving on me too much or not being in the correct position. As we approach the end of the video here, I just want to say thanks for stopping by. I plan on posting much more regularly on here. We're about to have our second child, so life is about to get busy. But do subscribe, and I will be posting an update video on the next stage of this guitar build pretty soon. Thanks, and I will see you soon. Bye.